Hello and welcome back to Mass Effect 3.2. As stated in my introduction video, Mass Effect 3.2 is my campaign and proposal to BioWare to remake Mass Effect 3 as their next big project, using the ideas outlined in my videos. My last videos have been focusing on characters up to Jacob, Ashley and EDI and Garrus and Grunt and Jack, and now I'd like to take this video to focus on Jacob and James, whose roles would be closely intertwined. It's a pretty radical idea, but hopefully you all will enjoy it. So let's get started. This section of the video series is focusing on the squad, in particular the characters. The following is a list of all squad members from each game of the trilogy, and my thoughts on their roles in Mass Effect 3. Many of the characters' roles were excellent, such as Garrus, Tali, Mordin, Thane, etc. However, I had issues with the characters whose roles only consisted of a simple mission followed by the character becoming a war asset. I believe that the relationships and decisions the player made with each character should have at least a decently large impact on the events of Mass Effect 3, so I was unhappy with the roles of characters such as Grunt, Jack, Samara, Jacob, etc. Some of these characters, I believe, should have joined the squad, while others should have carried out different roles. Okay, now, Jacob Taylor. Here I had issues as well. Please note that most of the topics covering James Vega will be included here as well. I want you guys to picture this for a moment. During the very first scene with Shepard in Mass Effect 3, when James comes into the room and salutes Shepard, imagine that Jacob walks in instead of James. Seeing as how we already have emotional attachments to Jacob, I think that Jacob could have fulfilled every role that James played in Mass Effect 3, and then some. However, I do not believe that James should be completely removed from the game. He should still be Jacob's replacement in Shepard's squad if certain conditions regarding Jacob are not met, the same way that Dr. Michelle replaces Dr. Chakwas if the latter did not survive the suicide mission. Obviously, Jacob cannot be on the squad if he did not survive the suicide mission. He should also not be on the squad if a save file was not imported from Mass Effect 2, as a new player would have no emotional attachment to Jacob. That way, James could still represent a new player coming to the franchise, to paraphrase BioWare's statement. Finally, Jacob's loyalty must be secured in Mass Effect 2 for him to replace James on the Mass Effect 3 squad. Now this is very important from a realistic standpoint. If Jacob was not loyal to Shepard, why would he stick around? It's also important from an ethical standpoint. If players prefer James over Jacob, they are not forced to make the unethical decision to kill Jacob off during the suicide mission just to get James on their squad. They can simply not complete Jacob's loyalty mission, and James joins the crew instead of Jacob. If any of these three conditions is not met, James replaces Jacob in Shepard's squad. If James is on the squad rather than Jacob, and Jacob is still alive, Jacob's role would be unchanged from its current situation. Between the events of Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, Jacob decides to rejoin the Alliance military if he was loyal. As we all know, Jacob disliked the Alliance because of the large role politics played and because of its lack of aggression. However, if he was loyal to Shepard, he decides to give it a second chance because he has seen admirable qualities in Shepard that reflect the Alliance. The Alliance, though skeptical of his record with Cerberus, has read his files and seen that Jacob disagreed with most of Cerberus's more extreme methods. Plus, with the Reaper threat imminent, they cannot afford to be very choosy. Seeing that Jacob is a skilled combatant and a biotic of considerable talent, they accept his application. If Jacob was not loyal, he leaves along with Miranda to pursue other goals. As stated before, if he joins the crew, he fulfills basically the same roles James would have played, including crashing the Alliance shuttle into the Cerberus shuttle on Mars when they fought Eva Kore, managing the Normandy's armory, etc. He'd be like James. He could even be persuaded to apply for N7 training, just as James can. A female Shepard could continue or start a romance with Jacob, culminating in an emotional romance scene en route to Kronos Station. If, however, he is not romanced by Shepard, he could develop an attraction, now don't freak out just yet, to Samantha Traynor. Now I know that in the current version she's a lesbian, but imagine for a moment that she wasn't. Jacob could see in her an embodiment of the qualities of the Alliance brass: honor, skill, courage, talent, and even beauty. If, however, he was romanced by a female Shepard, he would see those qualities in Shepard herself. If not, he could talk to a male or a female Shepard about his attraction to Traynor, and Shepard could encourage him to pursue a relationship with her, or dissuade him, similar to the way Shepard can encourage a relationship between EDI and Joker. If it is encouraged, Shepard can catch them in the act before the final mission, similar to seeing Garrus and Tali in the main battery. If, for political reasons, BioWare must have a completely lesbian character, Diana Allers could fill that role. Samantha Traynor could just kind of essentially swap places with Allers in regards to their sexuality. Traynor could be romanced by a male or female Shepard if desired, and the Jacob Traynor romance would never happen. As for the mission on Jellics, which is Jacob's mission with Dr. Cole, I still think it should happen, but without the romance between Jacob and Dr. Cole. But rather than being notified by Traynor, Jacob approaches you and says that he has been in contact with Dr. Cole and has been notified that they are trapped on Jellics, and the mission proceeds accordingly. I also have a suggestion for an additional mission. Jacob approaches you saying that because of the Reaper threat, his father's trial has been put on hold, but now he's received information that the holding facility that he was in has been attacked by Reaper forces and that most of the inmates have escaped. Furious, he asks to join you, similar to Liara asking to join you on Thessia and EDI at Chrono Station, on a mission to that planet/station, doesn't matter what, to look for clues about where his father might have gone. It wouldn't have to be a particularly long mission. You'd fight through some remaining Reaper forces to get to Ronald Taylor's cell, and much to everyone's surprise, they find him still sitting there. The door has been torn away, but he's just sitting on his cot. He explains that, after much time spent in reflection, he feels horrible about his past crimes and feels he just deserves to sit there and die. He pleads for his son's forgiveness. Via either a dialogue choice or a Paragon interrupt, Shepard can persuade Jacob to forgive his father on a personal level. An extremely emotional and tender scene would ensue, with father and son finally reunited emotionally. If forgiven, a short cutscene at the end of the game could show Ronald Taylor fighting with a platoon of Alliance soldiers. He throws himself on top of a Reaper grenade and thereby saves the soldiers, sacrificing himself. If he is not forgiven, Shepard, Jacob, and whichever squad member is chosen would just leave Ronald sitting in his cell, and that would be the end of the mission. Moving on to James quick. For most issues regarding James, see Jacob Taylor. I thought James was a fine representation of a new player coming to the franchise, to paraphrase BioWare's statement. Other than that, however, I found him to be a rather boring character. This game is the very last in the entire trilogy. Now is not the time to be making any new major emotional attachments. I rarely took James on missions because I felt that other characters were more emotionally rooted in the situation. Although I appreciate the impressive voice talents of Freddie Prinze Jr., I felt that sometimes the only reason the character existed was to slap an M rating on the game for strong language. As I said before, I think he's a relatable character for new players coming to the franchise, but I think trilogy fans should have the option of Jacob instead. Again, see Jacob Taylor, which we've just covered. Okay, so Jacob and James were quite similar characters in many ways. They were both human. They both either served with the Alliance or were serving with the Alliance. They both valued straightforwardness and honesty and honor. They didn't like under the table shady transactions. They didn't like a lot of politics, anything like that. So I feel like their roles are semi-interchangeable in Mass Effect 3. They could both fulfill their role equally as well. In my opinion, I would much rather have Jacob on the squad than James. This is Mass Effect 3. For someone who's played the entire trilogy, I don't feel like making more emotional attachments to characters right now, such as James. I personally would much prefer Jacob because I liked him in Mass Effect 2. I thought he was a great character. But if players want to have James instead, if they prefer James, they could have him through the criteria listed above. Which brings me to my next point. James was not really liked in Mass Effect 3 by most players. I find that most players who had not completed the rest of the trilogy and were starting their save file with Mass Effect 3 actually did like him, which I believe is credit to BioWare. I think that they achieved what they wanted to in James, and that is representing a new player coming to the franchise. You know, he's easy to relate to if you don't know all of these other characters that are surrounding you and you're suddenly supposed to know them. He's a great person to get attached to. However, for the majority of us who have completed the trilogy, I think that a character that we already know would be much preferable. And for some reason, Jacob was disliked too in Mass Effect 2, and I don't really understand that. I liked him. There was one YouTuber who posted a comment on a YouTube video And I wish I could remember what the channel was, but I don't, so I'm sorry. Whoever you are out there, if you're watching this video, I give you credit for this. He said that really the only reason that players disliked Jacob in Mass Effect 2 was that he was the most normal in the game. Out of everyone in your squad, he was the most normal, which makes so much sense because you're fighting with savages and psychopaths and assassins and genetically modified super soldiers, and it's just ridiculous. And so to have someone who's there, who's just your average soldier, makes him, in some people's opinion, a little more boring. I think it makes him more interesting because he's thrown into this eccentric cast of characters. Probably one of the reasons I liked him. So Jacob would definitely be my pick as a squad member in Mass Effect 3. But if you didn't like Jacob, or if you're a new player, James is your option. And what I talked about earlier about Jacob's loyalty is very important. It makes sense from an ethical standpoint. You don't have to kill Jacob off if you want James on your team, but it also makes sense from a realistic standpoint, because if you don't really get to know Jacob and you don't do his loyalty, he's a bit skeptical of Shepard. He doesn't really know who he is. He's not sure he trusts him. He's hesitant and kind of distances himself from his commander. If you do get to know him, he really trusts you, and you develop a friendship. And if you're a female Shepard, you might develop a romance. But even if you don't develop that romance, and you're still good friends with him, it makes sense that Jacob would want to stick around and be by Shepard at the start of Mass Effect 3. Why would he join the Alliance if Shepard never revealed him or herself to Jacob? If they never really got to know him, Jacob doesn't see these qualities about the Alliance, and it really doesn't matter whether you're a Paragon or a Renegade, because Jacob kind of comes from both sides. From a Paragon, that one's a little more obvious, this honor, this nobility. From a Renegade, that Renegade Shepard is still getting the job done and is not worrying about politics and is aggressive, something else that Jacob admires. So whether you chose the Paragon or the Renegade route, if he was loyal, it makes sense for him to stick around. And the reason I say loyal is because loyalty is sort of a standard. Like, if the character is loyal, you can assume that you got to know that character. Because in order for them to bring up their loyalty mission, you had to have had a certain amount of dialogues with them and conversations. So that's why it would make sense for Jacob to stick around, because he really sees and he gets to know Shepard and understands that, well, maybe the Alliance isn't so bad after all if there are soldiers like Shepard. Now, I said earlier that if James is on the squad rather than Jacob, and Jacob is still alive, Jacob's role would be unchanged from his current situation. And again, you might say, I thought you didn't like it when they became war assets. I don't, but if players prefer James over Jacob, but they don't want to kill Jacob off, it's sort of a testament to the fact that you were one of those players who didn't really like Jacob. You didn't really care for him very much, he was too boring for you, and you don't really care what happens to him in Mass Effect 3. By extension, you don't really care if he has a big impact, which is fine. If you don't care if he has a big impact or not, then you should be fine with him just simply becoming a war asset. So that's why I think it would be acceptable in that scenario. Also, I mentioned his potential romance to Samantha Traynor. I know that right now she's a lesbian. I think, though, that changing her sexuality would greatly flesh out Jacob's character, make him a little less boring, as well as make her a little less boring, because some players thought that she was kind of a pointless character too. So for them to end up together, if of course a female Shepard had not romanced Jacob, I think for them to end up together would be a really good subplot, a nice way of really integrating Jacob into the Alliance. He joins the Alliance because he likes those qualities in Shepard, and then he sees Traynor, develops a romance with her, and really realizes the Alliance is okay. You know, maybe it wasn't back when I was with it, but it's changed now. I'm glad I'm here serving with these honorable men and women. Now, as for the mission on Jelix, as I said, it would be unchanged except for that romance between Jacob and Dr. Cole. And of course, it would be somewhat changed because Jacob would actually be with you rather than on the base. And of course, this also eliminates Jacob cheating on you if you were a female Shepard who was in a romance with him, which was completely unlike his character. So that would eliminate that sort of plot hole personality-wise. So without this romance with Dr. Cole, and Dr. Cole of course could still be in it, she had explained to Shepard, if you talk to her, that she and Jacob had of course met through Cerberus and had been in contact and were friends, and then Jacob left Cerberus and she remained kind of tentatively, and she didn't really know why he had left. But then when she realized what the Elusive Man was really doing, she realized Jacob could help, and that's where the mission would start. Jacob would come to you saying, I've been contacted by my friend, she's still with Cerberus, but she wants out. There are lots of people with her, lots of civilian scientists who really need to get out. And the mission would just pursue as it usually does. And as for the mission that I suggested, I think it would be a very good idea. It'd be a really emotional and tender scene. And I'd like to clarify that by forgiving his father on an emotional level is not justifying what he had done. Prompting Jacob to forgive his father would not be justifying those actions. He's not saying, I forgive you, let's forget about what happened and we'll be father and son again. It's a recognition by Jacob of his father that his father is feeling guilty. On the planet, the father made some excuse about, oh, now he's feeling guilty and all this and all that. But now that they have seen that Ronald Taylor is sitting there in a cell, he's had all the opportunity he can to escape, but he wants to die. He literally wants to die because of what he's done. It's Jacob recognizing that guilt and saying, I forgive you, and really being reunited as a father and son. And that would show the importance of family unity, even if mistakes have been made. I think it would be a very, very tender scene without necessarily needing to forgive and forget what Ronald Taylor had done, because what he had done was an atrocity. And then, of course, this forgiveness is sort of a chain reaction, because now that Ronald Taylor is forgiven, he goes out there and he fights with those Alliance soldiers. It doesn't mean he actually needs to be employed by the Alliance, but he finds his way to Earth, and he's fighting the good fight and trying as hard as he can to win, and he sacrifices himself because Jacob had forgiven him and because Jacob had given Ronald his life back. He wants to give his life so that these Alliance soldiers can continue fighting, continue living. So that would be the end of the mission. I believe that is all I have to say about Jacob. I've given him, obviously, quite a larger role in Mass Effect 3.2. So, thanks for watching this video. Please let me know your feedback via the comments section. Tell me what you think of this idea. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. If you noticed any errors in the document or anything that could create a plot hole later on, anything like that, let me know. I'll do what I can to fix it. And we will see you with the next video. Thanks for watching.